Boom. And we're back. Okay. Sorry, it was a long time coming. I was supposed to start this, 12 minutes and 56 seconds ago, but there was a lot of hail today. It was a crazy day. I wasn't sure when the power was going to come back on, although it came back on. And yeah, just a good reminder of nature. Man, hail the size of golf balls. I was kind of worried about my car. I figured it was going to break the window, and I couldn't think of where I could put it anyway. But yeah, whoever thought hail was going to be so terrifying. Let me just make sure everything is streaming now. I think it's here. Looks good. What's up, Adam Baum? Is the sound okay? Next question. Is the sound working enough for you guys, or do I need to turn the sound back up higher? Let me, that's probably way different there. There, boom, right? This is like ideal sound. I had the microphone set to the other microphone. So, okay. Now I'm going to assume it's okay. Is the synchronization all right? I can't be sure. It looked like it was okay on my end. That stuff starts to mess up. Oh, that sucker up to your face, about a fist away from the face, Joe Rogan. Yeah. It's a fact. Okay. What do you think about the guy trying to Yeah, I mean, come on. Like, this is freaking YouTube. You can't ask, reasonable questions on YouTube. If we're going to start to ask reasonable questions, we're going to have to move away from YouTube and go to Odyssey. And if we're going to do that, I'm going to do that in the evenings. But let's definitely have an Odyssey show that you can have gnarly questions to Andrew Lepensi. Andrew, we can answer those questions probably better in the Discord as well. Okay. Skitter's actual sounding nice. Thank you. All good. There you go. Way better way to put it. Let's see. How would you put this best? Well, okay. So what you're asking about is, you got to remember, there's hearsay in the folk movement at the time, and they were only aware of what was going on in their own country. And so this is like disinformation campaigns all about, and people who've been pretending to be other people so they can get away with what they're doing are going to get their human body shield killed. And that's the thing that's important to remember. The other thing is, who gives permission to which groups to do whatever is not the group itself. It's always like something bigger. I don't know. I don't want to try to answer without using the words clearly. So I feel like we have to do that question on another show. I'm sorry. It's YouTube. They're evil here. Well, let me go to OBS. First, okay, here's the first thing I do want to do. I do want to do this. I was looking through my YouTube algorithmic responses, or whatever, the information, the data they give you, the SEC, SEO, and it said a lot of things. I didn't really care because, who cares? It just tells you how or where's your money coming from or something. But the thing that's interesting is some of you are from a place called Guernsey, and I'd never heard of Guernsey. Not really. I mean, I think my father knew of Guernsey. He might have mentioned it once, but I'd never been there. I don't know much about it. So I figured, wow, somebody's from this place. I should look up more about it. And now what we're going to do is we're going to spend a bit of time talking about Guernsey. So let me see if I can get this to work. I think it's this one. Window capture. Preferences. Everything every day. Until I decide to make it better. I'm sorry, guys. I think it's going to be... Is it going to be this one? Probably going to be this one. Let me go over here. Boom. Yep. Okay. Guernsey. I hope you guys can see this. This is Guernsey. This is the flag of Guernsey. Wild, right? Inside of another cross. The St. George Cross. 3 lions. And hopefully the person from Guernsey can, come talk to us on the Discord more, and we can learn a bit more about Guernsey, because I'm very interested in Guernsey. It's an English channel. It's an island off the English Channel off the coast of Normandy that is part of the Bailiwick of Guernsey, a British Crown dependency. It's the second largest of the Channel Islands, and an island group roughly north of St. Malo and west of Cotonou Peninsula. The jurisdiction, because by the way, I might be pronouncing some of these things wrong because it gets really confusing to me when you're pronouncing Norman, French, Scandinavian things. I don't know why. I can't always know. Greenwich is pronounced, Guernsey. Here's Guernsey. Here, Guernsey. I have to know it's going to be pronounced Guernsey. I'll get better at it, but It is not part of the United Kingdom, although the defense and some aspects of international relations are managed by the UK, although the bailiwicks of Jersey and Guernsey are often referred to collectively as the Channel Islands. The Channel Islands are not constitutional or political unit. Jersey has a separate relationship to the Crown from the other Crown dependencies of Guernsey and the Isle of Man, although all are held by the monarch of the United Kingdom. The island has a mixed British-Norman culture, although British culture influence is stronger, with English being the main language and the pound sterling the primary currency. The island has a traditional local language known as Guernsey. I think that's right. Or Guernsey, Guernsey French. Guernsey Norman French is the variety of Norman language spoken in Guernsey. It is sometimes known on the island as patois, or patois. A non-standard language. As one of the languages de Soy, it has langue d'oil. I'll have to work on that. It has its roots in Latin. Oh yeah, save that because it might be about Cajuns and stuff. It has its roots in Latin, but has its strong influences from both Old Norse and English at different points in history. There is mutual intelligibility with some difficulty with Hare or Jure, a Romance language that is spoken on Jersey, Jure, and the continental Norman speakers from Normandy. Like, gosh, I'd love to hear these guys speak, because I'm sure it's confusing to sound out in general. Guernsey most closely resembles the Norman dialect of continental spoken La Hague and in the Cotentin Peninsula of France. The Guernsey has been influenced less by standard French than Jure, but conversely more so than English. New words have been imported from modern phenomena like bikes and gas cookers. There is a rich tradition of poetry in the Guernsey language. Guernsey song was inspired by the sea, by colorful figures of speech, by traditional folklore, as well as by natural environment of the island. The island's greatest poet was Georges Métivier. Métivier was a contemporary of Victor Hugo, who influenced and inspired local poets to print and publish their traditional poetry. Métivier blended local place names, bird, animal names, traditional sayings, and orally transmitted fragments of medieval poetry to create his Rime Guernsey. Denis Courbet was considered the last poet of Guernsey, French, and published many poems in his day in his native tongue in the island newspapers privately. Most recent dictionaries of Guernsey, the most recent dictionary of Guernsey, Dictionnaire Anglais Guernsey by Marie de Guerre, was published in 1967 and revised in 1982. Okay, so now we kind of know a little bit about this language here, which is like a Frenchish kind of, in the sense that French is poor Latin, though it might be even more to that extent. What is this Gaulish experience of punishment? Okay, so, and then just really sweeping across here, this idea of Norman Arcadians. So the langue d'oil, d'oil, someone d'oil. I'm not going to try again. Or a dialect continuum that includes the standard French and its closest autochthonous relatives, which autochthonous apparently means an indigenous language. I'm going to keep that word and study that word more. No. I don't need indigenous. I need autochthonous. That is a wild word. I like it. I'm starting using that in every day. I'm going to go to school, go to like a coffee shop, and I'm just going to be like, oh yeah, that espresso. Just a little bit of autochthonous for this store. I don't know. So, historically spoken, in the northern half of France, southern Belgium, and the Channel Islands, these belong to the larger category of Gallo-Romance languages, including Franco-Provincial, portions of northern Italy, and the Daron, the Valley of the Aryan. Come on, that's important. Linguists divide the Romance languages of France, and especially of medieval France, into two main geographical subgroups: a language Doi of the north and the language Diok of the south, the southern half of France. Both groups are named after the word for yes in them or their recent ancestral languages. The most common modern language Doi is the standard French, in which ancestral oui has become oui. Oh my gosh, we did it. Doi. The languages of yes, of dwi, and the de oui, and the languages of de ok. Okay. Wow. Okay, I just learned so much that it blows my mind. Anyway, Guernsey. Gonna go jumping back to this place. Here's where it is. Right here off the coast of, well, you know, that's not good enough for you. But you know what? Let's just do this right. If you're going to do something, do it right. You go to the map, and you're going to see, real quick, it's St. Peter's Port, no joke, right off the coast of, hold on, load your internet, would you? So it's between France, like it's above, it's not, I thought it was above Brest, but really it's above Nantes and Rennes, and below Plymouth, okay? So, and it is clearly closer to France. I mean, it's like, you could almost from, I mean, I don't know how far that really is, but it seems like you could almost see Cherbourg, and Cosentin. So that, I would say that's more French located. But you know what? It's British culturally, so let's find out what they have to say about that. Point is, interesting location. I remember flying over Guernsey once and just not even knowing it was Guernsey. So let's go a little bit further to the history part. Oh yeah, first off, also Guernsey means, like Jersey, means, you know, E at the end of the word is for island. While the original root Guerns is of uncertain origin and meaning possibly deriving from either a personal name such as Grani or Warden, or from Groen, meaning pine tree. So interesting, you got these Scandies and Normans on this island, and you got some Gaulish tongue. So legit. But wait, there's more. Around 6000 BC, it was created. No. There was something I liked about it. Okay, well, you know, Roman settlement on the island. Amphore, Herculaneum. Okay, so this is the, check this out. Some of the stuff that you start noticing is things that look like this, that are buried. Look at this place here. Let me just zoom in. It's deep down, several layers of stone, and then there's this, which looks like it's a cutout doorway. So there's a number of these kinds of buildings with these. I mean, again, this has clearly been buried and cleaned out, and they're continuing to preserve by digging out this area. And you'll see that there's more places similar to that created here. Okay, St. Peter's Port Harbor, which has been named Asterix. It is thought. I mean, imagine, you know, if you've seen the cartoon Asterix. Is there going to be a picture of that anywhere? But here, just start checking out this place. You start to see like pretty impressive stonework everywhere. These angles, you know, we're not looking at it from above yet, so just notice that you got some angles to your fort. That's the beginning of it. Let me go to the medieval history part. That's where it really starts to come clear. In 933, the Cotentin Peninsula, including Avranches, was included, which included the islands, were placed by the French king Renouil under the control of William I. The island of Guernsey and the other Channel Islands represent the last remnants of the medieval Duchy of Normandy. In 1204, when King John lost the continental portion of the duchy to Philip II of France, the island remained part of the Kingdom of England. The island was then recognized by the 1259 Treaty of Paris as part of Henry III's territories. During the Middle Ages, the island was a haven for pirates that would use the lamping technique to ground ships close to the island. I think you can kind of assume what that means, but it's where a boat gets close to what they think is a lighthouse lamping, and then they can ground the ship, and they're like, oh, great, now we're stuck. And then a huge group of pirates show up, and they go around the boat, and then you're stuck, so you got to just kind of deal with it. This would make a good video game, in my opinion. Okay, so... Oh man, where is it? Lamping. There we go. Okay. to ground the ships close to the island. This intensified during the 100 Years' War, which started in 1339. Okay, so the 100 Years' War. So we've heard about the 80 Years' War, but we don't talk enough about the 100 Years' War. And again, we definitely covered this idea. Over 100 years, several generations completely forget what was going on before it. And if you start joining groups, I mean, you have to have these huge armadas, right? Eventually, these groups will speak a new language, even if they all had sort of a, within 4 generations, you can unify a tongue amongst an armada or an army. So that's the beginning of language control. Children are taken, raised to be soldiers. In a 100-year war, you know what they're going to do. They're going to be a soldier. So, you're training your kids to be soldiers. They're going to go to other camps and learn other groups' languages as well. So this is the beginning of language control and family. And this is according to the non-flamenco calendar, 1339. And we know that's a very close year to when the Jesuits are supposedly founded, according to the non-flamenco timeline. So this is interesting. The French interest in Catholicism. I mean, this is all the perfect time for it. Okay. Let me just get this right. The 100-Year War, which when it started in 1339, the island was occupied by the Capetians on several occasions. A house of France, the dynasty of Frankish origin. Frankish, by the way, means foreigner in Arabic. And a branch of the Robertians. It is among the largest and oldest royal houses in Europe and the world. Consists of Hugh Capet, the founder of the dynasty, and his male line descendants. I'm kind of mildly curious about... Wow, I like their logo. Some of these Normand royals, if they are Normand, I could be wrong. I mean, they might be... I guess technically they're saying Frankish, so we'll have to study what that really means. Germanic people, not even from Germany. We'll have to look into that. But yeah, apparently they want to say they're associated with the Lower Rhine, so... But I think the Frankish are far more worldly when you start to look at these guys. I see some of it. I see some of the Saxon, but I definitely see some more of the worldliness. Oh, mythological origins? I should just stop myself. Apart from the history of the Franks by Gregory of Tours, two early sources relate the mythological origin of the Franks. A 7th century work known as the Chronicle of Fredegar and an anonymous Liber Historiae Francorum. Okay, well, you know what? That's more for me. I'm going to have to check that out later. But Franks, the author of Chronicle of Fredegar, claims that the Franks originally came from Troy, which is, that Roman connection. We'll have to get into the Trojan thing. Okay, we'll save it. Let's just do this now. The Guernsey militia was first mentioned as operational in 1331 and would help defend the island for a further 600 years. In 1372, the island was invaded by the Aragonese. I never thought of it like that. Aragon Knights, Aragoners, Aragonese. That's fascinating to me. I love Aragon, so I have to wonder. I'll just save it for later. Under the command of Owain Logok, Yvonne de Gauls. I'm going to save that. Owain was Yvonne. Okay. Owain, Yvonne. Yeah, I get it. This is going to help us a lot. Logok de Gauls. Logok de Gauls. So now we know a lot, really, about... This is like a little decryption tool. Who was in the pay of the French king Owain and his dark-haired mercenaries who later absorbed into Guernsey. Legend as invading fairies. Okay, so in other words, they thought the Aragonese reminded them of this. They have a myth that has occurred since then of Guernsey being invaded by fairies, and it's connected. I'll read it again because I think I didn't say it very clearly. In 1372, the island was invaded by the Aragonese mercenaries under the command of Owain Logok, remembered as Yvonne de Gaulle, who was in the pay of the French king. Owain and his dark-haired mercenaries were later absorbed into Guernsey legends as invading fairies from across the sea. There you go. That was a lot clearer. Early modern period. As part of the peace between England and France, Pope Sixtus IV, the fourth, issued a 1483 papal bull granting the privilege of neutrality, by which the island, their harbors, their seas, and far as the eye can see, were considered neutral territory. Anyone molesting islanders would be excommunicated. A royal charter in 1548 confirmed the neutrality. The French attempted to invade Jersey a year later in 1549, but were defeated by the militia. The neutrality lasted another century, until William III of England abolished the privilege due to the Privateering Act against Dutch ships. In the mid-16th century, the island was influenced by Calvinist reformers from Normandy. During the Marian persecution, 3 women, the Guernsey martyrs, click here, were burned at the stake for their Protestant beliefs, along with the infant son of one of the women. The burning of the infant was ordered by the bailiff Helier Gosselin, with the advice of priests nearby who said the boy should burn due to having an inherited moral stain from his mother. Later on, Helier Gosselin fled the island to escape wider outrage. During the English Civil War, Guernsey sided with the parliamentarians. The allegiance was not total, however. There was a few royalist uprisings in the southwest of the island, while Castle Cornet was occupied by the governor. Okay, get ready for this. I'm going to just save it because it's a surprise. Was occupied by the governor, Sir Peter Osborne, and royalist troops in December 1651 with full honors of war. Castle Cornet surrendered, the last royalist outpost anywhere in the British Isle to surrender. Wars against France and Spain during the 17th and 18th century gave Guernsey ship owners and sea captains the opportunity to exploit the island's proximity to mainland Europe by applying for letters of marque and turning their merchantmen into privateers. By the beginning of the 18th century, Guernsey's residents were starting to settle in North America, in particular by founding Guernsey County in Ohio in 1810. The threat of invasion by Napoleon prompted many defensive structures to be built at the global maritime trade. And the rise of the stone industry, maritime trade suffered a major decline with the move away from sailing crafts as materials such as iron and steel were not available on the island. La Bray de Val was a tidal channel that made the northern extremity of Guernsey, Le Clos de Val, a tidal island. La Bray de Val was drained and reclaimed in 1806 by the British government as a defense measure. The eastern end of the former channel became the town and harbor from 1820 of St. Sampson, now the second biggest port in Guernsey. Something to study, but it's a new port, apparently. Maybe it's like a dugout area. I gotta look into that. The western end of Le Bray is now Le Grand Havre. I don't know. The roadway called the bridge across the end of the harbor at St. Sampson recalls the bridge that formerly links the two parts of Guernsey at high tide. New roads were built and main roads metalled for easy use by military. Infrastructure was funded by creating money debt-free starting in 1815. So, okay, just to jump a little bit to the castle. The Castle Cornet is a large island castle in Guernsey, informal tidal island known as the Cornet Rock or Castle Rock. Its importance was a defense not only for the island but of the roadstead. In 1859, it became part of the breakwaters of the Guernsey's main harbor, St. Peter's Port. So it's a star fort, and it's old, and some of it is bigger than other parts of it. I mean, you look at some of the stonework, and you're saying, okay, yeah, I can see where some of the stonework is literally made by people because it's just tiny. And there's other stonework that you're like, well, that's pretty impressive. They have some pretty giant stones there. And that's how it always goes. Here's the official history. Formerly a tidal island like Le Hoe on the west coast of Guernsey, it was first fortified as a castle between 1206 and 1256, following the division of the Duchy of Normandy. The wardening of Geoffrey de Lucy has been identified as a time of fortification in the Channel Islands. Timber and lead was sent from England for castle building in Guernsey and Jersey. At that time, the structure consisted of a keep, a chapel, 2 courtyards, and certain curtain walls. In 1338, when a French force captured the island, they besieged Cornet, capturing it on September 8th. The French then massacred the garrison of 11 men at arms and 50 archers. The island was retaken in 1340, and the castle was recaptured in August 1345 after a 3-day attack by professional soldiers and the local militia. The French had spent their 7-year occupation improving defenses including probably the Barbican. I'd like to know more. 1358, the French returned again and captured the castle, but they were evicted the following year, and an island trader was executed. In 1372, Owain Legoch, a claimant of the Welsh throne, leading a free company on behalf of France, attacked Guernsey in an assault popularly called La Descente de Aragonais. So, interesting. Welsh in Aragon. I get it. Legoch withdrew after killing 400 of the island militia, but without capturing the besieged Castle Cornet, which he found strong and well supplied with artillery. In yet another assault with French again captured the castle in 1380, before island forces again evicted them for a short time later. In the early 15th century, improvements were made. The Kerry Tower was constructed around 1435. A French assault in 1461 was repulsed. The construction cost for works, repairs, maintenance, and garrisons were met from revenues raised from the island by the warden, sometimes called the keeper of the castle, under royal warrant. The advent of cannon and gunpowder led to the castle being remodeled in 1545 and 1548. In 1547, the French, having captured Sark, descended on Guernsey. They met with gunfire off the coast of St. Peter's Port and by the cannon from the castle. Additional building work took place. Professor Jean Le Paturier mentions in the building of Castle Cornet that in 1566 iron and hammers were taken to Crevisham. Yeah, Crevisham. Okay, good, and that's how you pronounce it. Additionally, and that the island was quarried for material for the castle. Sand was brought from Herm. In 1594, the Royal Battery was completed at the Sutler House, and the bastions improved. Polygonal form was constructed. Okay, blah, 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 blah. But in the Civil War of 1642, the castle had 4 commanders. The castle supported the Royalist cause, whilst the island of Guernsey supported the parliamentarian cause. Sir Peter Osborne closing the castle on March 14, 1642. Throughout the siege, the castle cannon fired on the town of St. Peter's Port, reducing many buildings and forcing the royal court to relocate to Elizabeth College. It is estimated that 10,000 cannonballs were fired at the town during this period. The island commissioners were captured on a ship and taken to the castle, imprisoned in the Kerry Tower. They made a rope out of flax, escaped from the tower, and returned at low tide back to the island. In 1651, parliamentarian forces took the island of Jersey, which was royalist, and Ensign Nicholas Robert from St. Martin. Guernsey was with the parliamentarian forces. While he recovered the crown of England that belonged to Charles I from the courthouse in Jersey, and brought it back to Guernsey, delivering it to the governor of Castle Cornet. For 9 years, the castle held out, supported from the royalist forces of Jersey. 2 years after the execution of Charles I, while under the command of Colonel Roger Berger, the castle surrendered on December 17, 1651. The garrison of 55 were permitted to march out bearing arms and to leave the island. The royal crown was returned to London. Castle Cornet was the penultimate royalist garrison in the British Isles to surrender. It's fascinating, especially because we've been doing all this talk about the Civil War in Britain in the 1600s, 15th, 16th, 17th century. So this is an epicenter for the changeover. The castle was a prison for Civil War parliamentarian leaders Colonel John Lambert from 1662 to 1670. It also served as an official residence of the governor of Guernsey until the 30th of December 1672. When the keep was catastrophically destroyed, a bolt of lightning struck the magazine of the castle, destroying the keep and a number of other living quarters. Are you kidding me? I'm going to read it again. A bolt of lightning struck the magazine of the castle, destroying the keep and a number of living quarters. The governor at the time was Lord Houghton. The explosion killed his mother, his wife, and a number of other members of staff. Therefore, the governor of the island lived on the island rather than in the castle. The tower was not rebuilt. I mean, what? I guess. Yeah, it makes a little bit of sense. A little bit. I mean, wow. That's some biblical level karma. The castle was upgraded during the Napoleonic Wars period with additional barracks. I mean, I'm going to go ahead and say it. It just sounds like someone was playing with electricity in that tower, you know? The castle was upgraded during the Napoleonic period with additional barracks. Its use as the sole prison in the island ceased with the construction of a prison in St. James Street in 1811. The castle also became integrated into the breakwater from the island after the war. Along the breakwater, a pond for toy yachts was constructed in 1887 for the Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. Isn't that nice? The castle was used as a prison from the earliest times up until the end of the war. So, I mean, that's strange, isn't it? That they would convert this castle into a prison of all things that they could do with this nice castle. It's an island. And they know it's a castle. So, I don't know. It just seems like that's not what they originally wanted to do with that castle. During World War II, a small garrison of German troops occupied the castle, which they called Harbor Castle, Hafenschloss. The occupiers undertook concrete modifications to the castle to suit modern warfare. After the war in 1947, the Crown presented the castle to the people of Guernsey as a token of their loyalty during the two world wars. Interesting. Constructed over a period of 800 years on a small islet, there is little order in its construction. There are 6 gateways to negotiate to get to the citadel on top. The main gate, the outer ward, the Barbican, the citadel. And that's not 6, but I won't even worry about it. The Barbican is the outmost part of the medieval castle, dating to the mid-13th century. The arches inside allow defending. So, I mean, this is just interesting to me for a few reasons, but I like that this castle had a tower on it that got struck by lightning. And it killed a bunch of people. I don't like that it killed a bunch of people per se. I mean, officially. But I do think it's amazing that this area has such ancient history. And when you start to look into some of the mythology there of fairies, people that are essentially Tartarians, and that they think they come from Troy. So there's a lot to be said about Guernsey. It's something that ought to be looked into a lot more. Let's really quickly look at these innocent women who were murdered along with their baby because, you know, these good Christians wanted to make sure they were all safe. So they proved they weren't Catholic. They were the wife of Norman Calvinist ministers, or at least one of them was. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty terrible. I don't know what else to say about that, really. It's a horrible thing to happen. External relations, state of Guernsey. Let's look at some of their outfits. Nice outfits. Get it. Okay. Politics, external relation, parishes, infrastructure, transport, business, tourism. I mean, yeah, look at these, man. Sweet. Yeah, I would definitely visit. I think of all places I want to visit that are part of the Crown, I kind of am interested in visiting this place. Let's go back up a bit. Education. Renoir visited the island in the late summer of 1883. Wow, that cow is gorgeous. That's a very nice cow, right? It's pretty great. Healthy looking. Local food. Literature. Victor Hugo, having arrived on Halloween 1855, wrote some of the best known works while in exile in Guernsey, including Les Miserables. Les Miserables was written in Guernsey. Fantastic. I'm learning so much. His home was in St. Peter's Port. Hauteville House is now a museum administered by the city of Paris. In 1866, he published a novel set on Guernsey, Travailleurs de la Mer, Toilers of the Sea, which he dedicated to the island. Guernsey was his home for 15 years. So that's pretty interesting. Also, Mabel Collins, a theosophist and prolific author. Okay, so that's interesting. There's our link to mysticism again. And she wrote over 46 books on mysticism, so she's kind of a medium, you could say. Aleister Crowley claimed that Victoria Cremier had suggested that Collins was at one time being romantically pursued by both Cremier, and alleged that occultist Robert Donston Stevenson. Oh, really? Okay, so basically people just thought she was cute, and Cremier supposedly claimed that during this time she found 5 blood-soaked ties in a trunk under Stevenson's bed, corresponding to the 5 murders committed in Whitechapel by Jack the Ripper. Well, maybe, I don't know. I'm going to have to say I'll step back on that one. My understanding of Jack the Ripper is it's a far more royal problem, but I could see that Theosophist would probably be connected. I mean, these are royals on these little islands as well. I don't know much about her yet. I have to look into that more. G.B. Edwards, Guernseyman, wrote a critically acclaimed novel, The Book of Ebenezer LePage, which was published in 1981, including insights into Guernsey life in the 20th century. 1903, Henry Watson Fowler moved to Guernsey. Well, okay. So now we know a lot about Guernsey, I'll say. Let me do a quick check on this 100-Year War thing. The 100-Year War was one of the most significant conflicts of the Middle Ages. For 116 years, interrupting by several truces, 5 generations of kings from 2 rival dynasties fought for the throne of the largest kingdom in Western Europe. The war's effects on European history was lasting. Both sides produced innovations in military technology and tactics, including professional standing armies and artillery, that permanently changed warfare in Europe. Chivalry, which had reached its heights during this conflict, subsequently declined. This is why it's dead. Stronger national identities took root in both countries, which became more centralized and gradually rose to global powers. The term 100 Years' War was adopted by later historians as a historiographical periodization to encompass related conflicts, constructing the longest military conflict in European history. The war is commonly divided into 3 phases, separated by truces: the Edwardian War, the Caroline War, and the Lancastrian War. Each side drew many allies into the conflict, with English forces initially prevailing. The House of Valois ultimately retained control over France, with the previously intertwined French and English monarchies thereafter remaining separately. No, the previously intertwined French and English monarchies therefore remaining separate. Okay, so this took people who thought of themselves as pretty much the same kind of people and made them all divided over 116 years, and slowly even changed their languages. The root causes of the conflict can be traced back to the crisis of the 14th century Europe. The outbreak of war was motivated by a gradual rise in tension between the kings of France and England over territory. The official pretext was the question that arose because of the interruption of the direct male line of the Capetian dynasty. Tensions between the French and English crown had gone back centuries to the origins of the English royal family, which was French, Norman, and later Angevin. In her origin, because of William the Conqueror, the Norman duke who became King of England in 1066, English monarchs had therefore historically held titles of land without France, which made them vassals to the kings of France. The status of the English kings, French fiefs, was a major source of conflict between the two monarchies. Throughout the Middle Ages, French monarchs systematically sought to check the growth of English power, stripping away lands as the opportunity arose, particularly whenever English... One more time. Particularly, this is terrible. Particularly whenever England was at war with Scotland, an ally of France, English holdings in France had varied in size, at some points dwarfing even the French royal domain. By 1337, however, only Gascony was English. In 1328, Charles IV of France died without sons or brothers, and a new principle, Salic law, disallowed female succession. Charles' closest family relative was his nephew Edward III of England, whose mother Isabella was Charles' sister. Isabella claimed the throne of France for her son by the rule of proximity of blood, but the French nobility rejected this, maintaining that Isabella could not transmit a right she did not possess. There's a whole link here. Nemo dat quod non habet, literally meaning no one can give what they do not have, is a legal rule. I like it. An assembly of French barons decided that the native Frenchmen should receive the crown rather than Edward, so the throne passed instead into Charles' patrilineal cousin, Philip, Count of Valois. Edward protested, but ultimately submitted and did not homage for Gascony. Further French disagreements with Edward induced Philip, during the May 1337, to meet with his great council in Paris. It was agreed that Gascony should be taken back into Philip's hands, which prompted Edward to renew his claim for the French throne, this time by force of arms. Edwardian phase. In the early years of the war, English, led by their king and his son Edward, the Black Prince, saw resounding successes, notably at Crecy and Poitiers, Crecy. In 1356, where King John II of France was taken prisoner. Caroline phase and Black Death. By 1378, under King Charles V and Wise, and the leadership of Bertrand de Guesclin, the Eagle of Brittany and the Black Dog of Brochelidond, was a Breton knight. The French had reconquered most of the lands ceded to King Edward by the Treaty of Brittany, signed in 1360, leaving English with only a few cities on the continent. In the following decade, the weakening of the royal authority combined with the devastation caused by the Black Death from 1347 to 1351, with the loss of nearly half of the French population and between 20 and 30% of English ones, and the major economic crisis that followed, led to a period of civil unrest in both countries. These crises were resolved in England earlier than in France, Lancastrian phase and after. The new crown, Henry V of England, seized the opportunity presented by the mental illness of Charles VI of France and the French Civil War between Armagnacs and the Burgundians to revive the conflict. Overwhelming victories at Agincourt in 1415 and Verneuil in 1424, as well as the alliance with the Burgundians, raised the prospect of an ultimate English triumph and persuaded English to continue the war for many decades. I'm going to check out these Burgundians a bit more. Conflict between two cadet branches of the French royal family, the House of Orleans and the House of Burgundy from 1407 to 1435. Well, however, a variety of factors such as the death of both Henry and Charles in 1422 and the emergence of Joan d'Arc, which boosted French morale, and the loss of Burgundy as an ally, marking the end of the Civil War in France, prevented it. I gotta go deeper into Joan d'Arc. Joan d'Arc is cool. The Siege of Orleans in 1429 announced the beginning of the end for English hopes of conquest, even with the eventual capture of Joan by the Burgundians and her execution in 1431. A series of crushing French victories, such as those at Patay in 1429, Formignon in 1450, and Castillon in 1453, concluded the war in favor of the Valois dynasty. England permanently lost most of its continental possessions, with only the Pale of Calais remaining under its control on the continent, until it was too lost in the Siege of Calais in 1558. Local conflicts in neighboring areas which were contemporarily related to the war, including the War of Breton Succession, 1341-1365, and the Castilian Civil War, 1366 to 1369, the War of the Two Peters, let's check that out, in Aragon, and the 1383 to 85 crisis in Portugal. Well, come on. I mean, these are all exciting. Were used by the parties to advance their agendas. So, I mean, granted, I don't really actually believe in the Gregorian chronology. I think we all know that I have some skepticism about the Gregorian chronology. The idea of these events being correlated in this supposed 13th century, I actually do think it's important to study the 100 Years' War. Most of the answers you can find about European conflict before or after the Arabic secession, you have to remember very quickly after the 100-Year War begins post-Islamic Spain. So simultaneously to all this is the Umayyad Caliphate, an important Arabic periods in history where most of Europe is really under the control of Arabs. Edward the Black Prince has been suggested as actually being Moorish, partially black because of the Portuguese connections, and then he would have family line that are far more civilized during this period. And then the Black Plague, interesting that they call it that, but it's a bubonic plague period that really is a viral, or maybe not viral, but you could say there's a Yeah, I mean, at least marketing-wise, there's this viral marketing, about this plague. Black doors, everyone's supposed to be dying. It's not like it lasts 100 years. This is only supposed to be 3 or 5 years. But during this period, half of the population is gone, and so many of the royal houses are left open. Particularly rich, wealthy people die. And so many of these swarthy peasant stocks seem to survive and make their way into these abandoned mansions. And that begins the end of... well, it's not the end of feudalism per se, but it's a new royalty that starts to emerge. And people start paying for false family lineage proofs to say, oh, well, my family have always lived in this mansion that we inherited in the 14th century. New royals. Well, French nationalism, English nationalism, connections to the War of Roses. There's a movie about the War of Roses. Let's look at this picture real quick. Pretty sweet. You know what? I'm going to save that picture. That could be like a nice background or desktop picture or just something. Well, one second. The War of Roses, known at the time and for more than a century later as the Civil Wars, were a series of civil wars that fought over control for the English throne in the mid to late 15th century. Fought between supporters of two rival cadets, branches of the royal house of Plantagenet, Lancaster, and York. The wars extinguished the male lines of two dynasties, leading to the Tudor family inheriting the Lancastrian claim. Following the war, the houses of Tudor and York were united, creating a new dynasty, therefore resolving the rival claims. The conflict had its roots in the wake of the 100-Year War and its emergence of socio-economic troubles, which weakened the prestige of the English monarch. Unfolding structural problems of bastard feudalism and the powerful duchies created by Edward III and the mental infirmary. This is actually what I think I was talking about a second ago. Controversial term invented in the 19th century to characterize the form of feudalism that took place in the Middle Ages. Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was just talking about a second ago with the plague and enclosure movement and new royals. And the mental infirmity and the weak rule of Henry VI, which revived interest in the Yorkist claim to the throne by the Richard of York. Historians disagree over which of these factors were the main catalyst for the war. The war began in 1455 with Richard of York capturing Henry at the First Battle of St. Albans, and was, by the way, you guys remember the Viscount of St. Alban, right? Is Bacon, and was appointed Lord Protector by Parliament, leading to an uneasy peace. Fighting resumed 4 years later. Yorkists led to the Warwick of Kingmaker, captured Henry again at the Battle of Northampton. Richard of York attempted to claim the throne, but was dissuaded and was killed at the Battle of Wakefield. His son Edward inherited this claim. Yorkists lost custody of Henry after the Second Battle of St. Albans, but destroyed the Lancastrian army at the Battle of Towton. Edward was formally crowned 3 months later in June 1461. Resistance to Edward's rule continued but was crushed at the Battle of Hexham in 1464, leading to a period of relative peace. Edward married Elizabeth Woodville, the widow of Lancastrian knight, and showed favor to her family. He also reversed Warwick's policy of seeking closer ties with France. Warwick was offended and sidelined and turned against Edward. In 1469, his supporters defeated Yorkist armies at the Battle of Edcote. He captured and imprisoned Edward shortly afterwards. However, his attempt to replace Edward with his younger brother, George of Clarence, met with no support, and Edward was allowed to resume his rule, seemingly reconciled with Warwick. Within a year, Edward accused Warwick and Clarence of fresh treachery and forced them to flee. In France, Warwick joined the forces with Margaret of Anjou and led to an invasion of England. When Warwick's younger brother John Neville deserted Edward in turn was forced to flee to Flanders. Warwick restored Henry VI as king. So getting into the Battle of the Roses. Oh yeah, let's a little bit further. Why not? Henry's renewed reign was short-lived, however. With aid from Burgundy, Edward mounted a counter-invasion. Henry returned to prison, and Edward defeated and killed Warwick at the Battle of Barnet. He then defeated a Lancastrian army at the Battle of Tewkesbury. Henry's heir, Edward of Westminster, was captured and executed. Henry himself died or was assassinated on Edward's order shortly afterward. Edward ruled in unopposed, and King Edward ruled unopposed, and England enjoyed a period of relative peace until his death 12 years later in 1483. Edward's 12-year-old son reigned for 78 days as Edward V until he was deposed by his uncle Richard III. Richard assumed the throne under a cloud of controversy, particularly the disappearance of Edward IV's two sons, sparking a short-lived but major revolt and triggering a wave of desertions of prominent Yorkists to the Lancastrian cause. In the midst of the chaos, Henry Tudor, son of Henry IV's half-brother, returned from exile with an army of English, French, and Breton troops. Henry defeated and killed Richard at Bosworth Field in 1485, assumed the throne as Henry VII, and married Elizabeth of York, the eldest daughter and sole heir of Edward IV, thereby uniting the rival claims. The Earl of Lincoln then put forward Lambert Simnel as an impostor Edward Plantagenet, a potential claimant to the throne. Lincoln's army was defeated and Lincoln himself killed at Stoke Field in 1487, ending the wars. Henry never faced any further serious internal military threat to his reign. 1490, Perkin Warbeck claimed to be Richard of Shrewsbury, Edward IV's second son and rival claimant to the throne, but was executed before any rebellion could be launched. The House of Tudor ruled England until 1603. The reign of the Tudor dynasty saw the strengthening of the prestige and power of the English monarchy, particularly under Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, and the end of the medieval period in England, which subsequently saw the dawn of the English Renaissance. Historian John Guy argued that England was economically healthier, more expensive, and more optimistic under the Tudors than at any other time since the Roman occupation. Is this a different John Guy? It must be a new John Guy. Yeah, okay. There's, I guess, other people like to name their kids John Guy. Nomenclature and symbolism. The name of War of Roses refers to the heraldic badges associated with the two rival branches of the royal house of Plantagenet fighting for control over English throne. The white rose of York and the red rose of Lancaster. See, you wondered why I cared enough to tell you all this. And it has to do with Alice in Wonderland, right? We're painting the roses. I'm trying real hard here. Red. We're painting the roses red, okay? We're painting the roses red. The Tudor rose. The Lancaster rose, okay? White roses painted red, okay? So this is important for a lot of reasons, but hopefully that's the clearest of them. The people divided in their affections took different symbols of party. The partisans of the House of Lancaster chose the red rose as their mark of distinction. Those of the York were dominated from the white, and those civil wars were thus known over Europe by the time the quarrel between those two roses. The modern term War of Roses came into common use in the early 19th century following the publication of the 1829 novel Anne of Geierstein by Sir Walter Scott. Scott based the name on a scene in William Shakespeare's play Henry VI, Part 1, Act 2, Scene 4, set in the gardens of the Temple Church, where a number of noblemen and a lawyer pick red. By the way, a lawyer. Just let's think. If you guys remember Henry VI, there's a little Baconian moment there. The lawyer picked red or white roses to symbolically display their loyalty to the Lancastrian or Yorkist faction, respectively. During Shakespeare's times, the conflict was simply referred to as the Civil Wars. The Yorkist faction used the symbol of the white rose from early in the conflict, but the red rose of Lancaster was introduced only after the victory of Henry Tudor at the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485. After Henry's victory and marriage to Elizabeth of York, the sole surviving heir of Edward IV, the two roses were combined to form the Tudor rose, to symbolize the union of the two claims. The use of the rose itself as a cognizance stemmed from Edward I's use of a golden rose stalked proper. Really. Often owing to nobles holding multiple titles, more than one badge was used. Edward IV, for example, used both of his Sun in Splendor as Earl of March, but also his father's falcon, and Fetterlock as Duke of York. Badges were not always distinct. I like, by the way, the sun in splendor. I should look at that more. Like, it's, I guess, Hellenistic, and it deals with their idea that they are Trojans. Badges were not always distinct. At the Battle of Barnet, Edward's sun was very similar to the Earl of Oxford's Veer Star. Well, come on. I gotta get deeper into this. This is important. Men, where are you? War, where are you when I need you? Badges were not always distinct. At the Battle of Barnet, Edward's sun was very similar to Ed de Vere's star, which caused fatal confusion in the fighting. This is so important. This is so crazy. This line right here, I'm going to have to come back to this. You're like, what do you care? And I'll tell you another time. But clearly, you know, if you think about the difference between the sun and the star, I mean, this is just a crazy little story right here. This idea of the, okay, well, Veer star. Many participants who wore livery badges. A heraldic badge or livery badge, a personal device worn as a badge, indicates allegiance to, associated with their immediate liege lords or patrons. Wearing of livery was confined to those in continuous employ of a lord, thus excluding, for example, mercenary companies. For example, Henry Tudor's forces at Bosworth fought under the banner of a red dragon, while the Yorkist army used Richard III's as a personal device of a white boar. While the name of the rival house derives from the city of York and Lancaster, the corresponding duchy and dukedom had little to do with these cities. The land and offices attached to the Duchy of Lancaster were primarily located in Gloucestershire, North Wales, Cheshire, and ironically in Yorkshire, while the estate of the Duke of York were spread throughout England and Wales, with many in Welsh marches. I should do at some point just a whole thing on how to pronounce Old English, Norman names, places, Cheshire, like Greenwich, for instance, right? Greenwich. How does this happen? So many English don't even think about the fact that English is a second language in England, or a third or fourth language, right? It's not even the way they used to speak very recently. Bastard feudalism. Edward III, who ruled England from 1327 to 1377, had 5 sons who survived into adulthood. Edward of Woodstock, the Black Prince, Lionel of Antwerp, John of Gaunt, Edmund of Langley, and Thomas of Woodstock. Throughout his reign, he created duchies for his sons, Cornwall in 1337 for Edward, and Clarence in Lancaster in 1362 for Lionel, and John, respectively. Edmund and Thomas became the Dukes of York and Gloucester, respectively, in 1385 during the reign of Richard II. Dukedoms had hitherto never been conferred by any English monarch upon a subject until the creation of the Duchy of Cornwall in 1337, and their genesis spawned a powerful new class of English nobility with claims to the throne and theoretically enough power to vie for it. Since the new duchies proved in Edward's son and their heirs presumptive with an income independent of the sovereign or of the state, thereby allowing them to establish and maintain their own private military retinues. Over time, these duchies began to exacerbate the structural defects inherent in the so-called bastard feudalism, a somewhat controversial term coined in 1885 by historian Charles Plummer, but largely defined by Plummer's contemporary William Stubbs. During the reign of Edward's grandfather, Edward I, Stubbs describes a substantive shift in social dynamics in which the conscription-based feudal levy came to be replaced by a system of royal payment in return for military service by the magnates who served thus as monarch. Thus, instead of vassals rendering military service when called, they paid a portion of their income into their lord's treasury, who would supplement their own service with hired retainers. These retinues were known as affinities, essentially a collection of all the individuals to whom a lord had gathered for service, and came to be one of the most fundamentally defining aspects of bastard feudalism. These affinities also had the means of tying the more powerful magnates to the lower nobility. Although these relationships were now largely defined by personal connections that exhibited reciprocal benefit rather than tenurial or feudal relationships that preceded bastard feudalism. Consequently, lords could now raise retinues they could implicitly trust, since the men of the affinity owed their position to their patron. These affinities were often much larger than the number of men and the Lord actually knew, since the members of the affinity also knew and supported each other. Under the reign of Richard II, this created a powerful struggle with the Magnates, as Richard sought to increase the size of his own affinities as a counterweight to the growing retinues of his nobles. The retinues of the Magnates became powerful enough to defend their interests of the Lord against even authority of the monarch, as John of Gaunt and later his son Henry Bolingbroke did against Richard. During the wars, disaffected magnates such as Richard of York and Warwick the Kingmaker were able to rely upon their complex networks of servants and retainers to successfully defy the authority of Henry VI. Then came the succession crisis. The question of succession following the death of Edward III in 1377 is said by Mortimer to be the root cause of the War of Roses. Although Edward's succession seemed secure, there was a sudden narrowing in the direct lines of descent nearing the end of his reign. Edward's two eldest sons, Edward, Duke of Cornwall, also known as Edward the Black Prince, and heir presumptive Lionel, Duke of Clarence, had predeceased their father in 1376 and 1368, respectively. Edward III was survived by three sons who claimed the throne: John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, Edmund of Langley, and Thomas of Woodstock. The Black Prince had a son, Richard, who had claimed the throne based upon the principle that the son of an elder brother, Edward in this case, had priority in the line of succession over the uncles. However, as Richard was a minor and had no siblings on his father's side, he had three living uncles at the time of Edward III's death. There was considerable uncertainty within the realm over who should inherit the throne. Ultimately, Edward was succeeded by his grandson, who was crowned Richard II at just 10 years old. Under the laws of primogeniture, if Richard died without a legitimate heir, his successors would be the descendants of Lionel of Antwerp, the Duke of Clarence, Edward III's second eldest son. Clarence's only child, his daughter Philippa, married into the Mortimer family and had a son, Roger Mortimer, who technically would have been the best legal claim of succession. However, a legal decree issued by Edward III in 1376 introduced complexity into the question of succession, since the letter patent he issued limited the right of succession to his male line, which placed his third son, John of Gaunt, ahead of Clarence's descendants, since the latter were descendant through the female line. Richard's reign was tumultuous, marked by increasing dissension between the monarchs and several of the most powerful nobles. Richard's rule without a regency council, despite his young age, in order to exclude his uncle, John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster, from wielding legitimate power. Unpopular taxes, which funded unsuccessful military expeditions in Europe, triggered the Peasants' Revolt in 1381, and Parliament refusal to cooperate with the king's unpopular Lord Chancellor Michael de la Pole created a political crisis that seriously threatened to dethrone King Richard. Richard had repeatedly switched his choice of heir throughout his reign to keep his political enemies at bay. In France, much of the territory conquered by Edward III had been lost, leading Richard to negotiate a peace with Charles VI. The peace proposal, which had effectively made England a client kingdom of France, was derided and rejected by Parliament, which had predominantly controlled the knights fighting the war, which was predominantly controlled by the knights fighting the war. Richard decided to negotiate a de facto peace directly with Charles without seeking parliamentary approval, and agreed to marry his 6-year-old daughter, Isabella of Valois. Wow. Richard used the interim peace to punish his political rivals. When John of Gaunt died in 1399, Richard exiled Gaunt's son, Henry Bolingbroke, to France and confiscated his lands and titles. In May 1399, Richard left England for a military expedition in Ireland, giving Bolingbroke the opportunity to return to England. With the support of much of the disaffected nobility, Richard was deposed, and Bolingbroke crowned as Henry IV, the first Lancastrian monarch. Wow. I like his outfit, too. It's like this kind of like turtleneck fleece kind of thing going on. Well, the House of Lancaster descended from John of Gaunt, the third surviving son of Edward III. The name derives from Gaunt's primary title as Duke of Lancaster, which he held by right of his spouse, Blanche of Lancaster. Lancastrian claim of the throne had received preference from Edward III, which explicitly emphasized the male line of the descent. Henry IV based his right to depose Richard II and subsequent assumptions on the throne upon his claim, since it could be argued that the heir presumptive was in fact Edward Mortimer, the grandson of Edward III's second surviving son, Lionel, Duke of Clarence. However, Mortimer was descended from the female line, inherited the claim from his grandmother, Philippa, and important branch of the House of Lancaster was the House of Beaufort, whose members were descended from the Gaunt by his mistress Catherine Swineford. Originally illegitimate, they were legitimized by the Act of Parliament when Gaunt and Catherine later married. However, Henry IV excluded them from the line of succession to the throne. Okay, so now we get into that. It's pretty much the end of the hour now. There are some things I wanted to talk about with you anyway. Let me try to remember what they were. Oh, there's a couple of video games I've been playing recently. Let me try to remember what they're called. So Brittany and I are doing Twitch. I'm doing Twitch all the time now. So you go on the Twitch, you can see it. There's a video that's a few videos back that's on YouTube. That's a kind of a demonstration of the Twitch video where I went to Saint Denis in the Red Dead Redemption game and took an air balloon over the lands. I like doing that. Sometimes that metaverse can give you some history lessons that are illegal in the real world, but they're okay if they're in a video game. But there's also this game called It Takes Two, and I think It Takes Two is probably like the raddest game that has come out ever. It's like probably the game of the decade. It's a cooperative game where basically a little girl, her parents are going to get divorced, and she like cries over their little voodoo dolls that she made, and it turns the parents' souls into the voodoo dolls, and they're stuck, and then they have to work together to get out. And there's this crazy Mexican lovemaking book that is telling them that they have to, suck the vacuum cleaner's eyes out of its head. It's a great game. So I recommend you guys try out It Takes Two. The other cool game is Haven, and you can watch this on twitch.com/Exertus. Also, make sure you're listening to the music, soundcloud.com/Exertus. Follow me on Twitter, Andreas Exertus. Follow me on Instagram, Exertus. Just try to find me and follow me. And there's a couple other things. Oh, these videos that I'm making right now will not be monetized properly for a day because after it's done, YouTube has to have someone go in and physically review it. Otherwise, I get these like yellow marks down, and it's a pain. So please continue to support Andreas.me, Exertus.com, Patreon.com/Exertus. You get the idea. And on top of that, if you guys want more questions answered, just keep leaving super chats, and I will focus on those subjects. I don't know if we're doing it tonight, but I might be doing a live tonight with alien scientist Jeremy Reese. I know a lot of you are not super into the whole space thing, which makes it all the more interesting to me, to be honest. So trying to get that done either tonight or tomorrow is his birthday, so might be later this week. But I have a number of new guests lined up. If there's anyone else you want me to interview, suggest them. And if you can, reach out to them and start the conversation. That would be great. Okay, now I'm going to do my business by reading through some of these comments. History is a lie. Pretty based. I agree. Yeah, history is a lie. What's the lie about? That's what we're trying to find out. Caucasus, people from the Caucasus who were survivors of leprosy millennia ago, people with leprosy were banished to the Caucasus Mountains, and that's how we got our identity. Interesting. Maybe. That's a cool myth. I mean, the biblical myths about that are not that much better. Their skin was blanched like almonds by God for being naughty. I've heard that for sure. Etymologia de Edward. Yep, Pollock's right. Gloucester. Benoit's there. Nicholas Benoit. Thank you, bro. Or Benoit. I think it's Benoit. I don't know. See, can't trust me. I'm going to sound like the worst at reading any language at this point. I'm aware of that. I'm going to have to really practice some of these names. But yeah, Gloucester. I've been saying Gloucester, maybe something like that. That's what I mean. Some of these names of the English. Imagine getting on an English subway. Like what's up with you guys? Every word is you're clearly from an old language that is not spoken in England anymore. So figure that out, because clearly it's a new language. Semiotics. Why is red a stop sign? Pollock asks. Well, red's also associated with love. I mean, it's the color of the wedding dresses of China were supposed to be red, so passion and everything. I don't know. I don't know why red is stopped. Is that just literally because of that? Is it because they hate the Tudor house? I don't know. Well, on that, I thank you. I'm going to also have a new section on the Discord called Dailies, and you can go there. And if you have any suggestions, put a link in there, and we'll make sure to talk about that next time. I'm no longer going to be doing exclusively history. I love history, but I mainly I recognize that people want some news. I don't see anything of relevance happening today. I mean, they tried to stop Elon Musk's buy of Twitter again. They're going to sue him. There was like a breach board. Who cares? All right. Love you guys. Talk to you soon. Pay attention. Stay vigilant. Guys and gals and everything in between. It's a pleasure. Peace.